know anything about me, you know I've been a near lifelong user of the Canon cinema cameras, starting way back in 2006 with the XL2. Not for any particular reason, that's just how things have kind of shaken out for me, but I've enjoyed the ride. Since then, I've owned the C100 Mark II that I'm shooting on now, and the C500 Mark II, and was given the opportunity to test out the C70 and the C300 Mark III when they came around. So I've got a good grasp on the whole line, and so far I've been pretty impressed with all of them. Recently, I've been doing a lot more two camera shoots, and generally have relied on my Fujifilm X-T3 as my B cam. But the limitations of a DSLR style body were starting to rear their heads more and more, to the point that it was becoming problematic. You know, for certain things, it's totally fine, but for time limited recording and the lack of ND specifically were causing me issues. I suppose I could use the C100 Mark II to play second fiddle to my C500 Mark II, but the difference between the two is kind of apparent. But I had two gigs coming up, a corporate interview style shoot and a fashion campaign. And the added friction of the X-T3's limitations were causing me concern. You can pretty much get any camera to match any other camera in the grade, especially when you have matched lenses, but it does take added time that I didn't necessarily have on these jobs. And you know, I wanted the convenience. So specifically what I needed was the same 4K C-Log2 image that my C500 is kicking out for ease of coloring and matching, extended record times, built-in NDs, and audio recording. Obviously what I needed was a C70. I could have gone with a C300 Mark III, but I did like the idea of the smaller form factor for ease of packing and handling, as well as the fact that my second tripod was built for photo cameras and likely couldn't hold the weight of a full-size body like that. Not that it's too heavy, but plus the image coming out of the C70 is functionally identical to the C300 Mark III. So, you know, it's fine. It's basically the same camera. The only real difference is SDI. Luckily, Filmtools is able to lend me their floor model C70 for my shoots, and Canon really upped the game by providing me a set of Sumire primes, as well as the PL mount for my C500 Mark II, and I was able to buy a PL to R mount adapter for a very affordable price for the C70, so I was set to go. The corporate video went as expected, people sitting there and being interviewed. Didn't use the Sumires on those, didn't have them yet, so there's not a ton to talk about there, but the fashion shoot is where the two camera setup really shined, and it, frankly, is more interesting. Here's some footage of the two camera setup from the interview. Looks nice. Okay, so what happened with the fashion shoot is I had my friend Adam Green as my second shooter, who's helped us do a lot of coverage of shows like Cinegear, Adobe Max, NAB this year, and he would hop between shooting second angles and BTS when called upon for this thing. The two of us would switch cameras on the fly, with the Sumire 50mm living on the C70 and the 35mm on the C500 Mark II, instead of swapping lenses between the bodies. But also because some of the content I had to shoot was vertical, so the C70 was easier to manage for that stuff. Except for when I saw vertical footage, which made it pretty obvious, I pretty much couldn't tell which camera shot what. The C500 C70 combo really is the perfect pair, especially with the C500 just receiving a pretty drastic price cut, fully covering the cost of a theoretical additional C70 if you wanted it and had originally budgeted for the C500's 16,000 MSRP. Now it's 11. The only giveaway image-wise came down to the rendering via the Sumires. At this point, I'm convinced the pairing is the perfect two-camera setup for most shoots, only being busted by, I guess, two C500s. I have a separate review of the lenses going into more detail. It's coming out, but as this was a fashion video and we wanted the image to have some life to it, we shot these things wide open at T1.5 or T1.3, depending on the lens. And when stopped down quite a bit, the Sumires sort of look like normal Cine E's, which are great lenses, but wide open, they have this really wonderful soft character, especially around the edges, and some tasteful chromatic aberration in certain circumstances. As well as this amazing focus fall off that's just very smooth and pretty. And the images have this like glow and pop that's really nice. You know, no need for a filter on these things. It's got its own look. Additionally, shooting on a 35mm lens on a full frame camera wide open at such a low stop gave a very cool look to the images, especially in the wides. You know, it's kind of the classic when people think about the full frame look, and I've got a lot on the full frame look, but it's the thing that people are thinking about when they say that, that this really delivered on. And you better believe that we were almost always using all 10 stops of ND that both cameras have, by the way. Every so often we'd stop down a little bit to either extend the depth of field touch or sharpen up the image when necessary, or just shave off some of that exposure, because even then it was still kind of bright outside. We were in the desert, but generally wide open. The other advantage of such a fast set of lenses was obviously as the shoot got later in the day, we could just take off some of the ND and keep our look consistent while also allowing us to shoot way later than we ever expected without having to rely on ratcheting up the ISO. You know, the sun was down and we were still shooting inside it. Another thing that was an unexpected benefit and became a teachable moment for me was the internal scratch mic. Obviously, not the greatest thing in the world. It's not intended to do anything but sync sound. But I did end up using the audio it captured in the final edit in the form of engine noise from the truck and motorcycle. Weirdly enough, I think that because the sounds were so loud, it somehow erased the lo-fi quality you expected from these kinds of microphones. I don't really know what happened, but honestly, the client thought that I went and got some stock audio, but it just worked. I EQ'd it a little bit, you know, I cleaned it up, but it worked great. The lesson, though, is to always bring a mic. I was so sure that this shoot would be MOS, but why limit myself in the edit? You know, just get a little on-camera mic. At least you have something slightly better than the scratch, although it did technically work here. Like, you know, luckily I got away with it. But next time, little top mic or something, even for stuff that I know for a fact is going to not be shooting audio. As we were shooting handheld for the vast majority of the project, the internal stabilization really helped us out as well. Granted, it is EIS, so electronic instead of optical, but obviously cinema primes don't have OIS built in. So I was able to get some shots that would otherwise look kind of cheap, including one instance where I was fully leaned out of the car filming out of the passenger side of my best friend's ride, filming a motorcycle on a rather bumpy, dusty road, and, you know, cleaned it up decently enough. It also really smoothed out my little trusty hip dolly maneuver, where I basically just pan one direction and physically move in the other for some added dynamicism in the image. And I kind of learned that from working with the warp stabilizer. Like, it likes a certain type of parallax to really lock in. So if you just kind of like, you're here and then you just, it works good. Anyway, one thing I love about the Canon cinema cameras is they absolutely sip on power. We were shooting all day on one 98 kilowatt hour battery each. More or less. We would switch to fresh ones for safety, but when we left base camp, but the bricks were never under 50% in any case when we would do that. You know, trust me, I've done it before. I ran a camera on a shoot the other day, my C500, 2 batteries, 6 hours, 7 hours, and the second battery didn't run out. You know, I was on my second battery by the end of it. So they're great. Also, the 2 card slots on each camera is excellent because it allows you to roll all day, not have to worry about swapping cards, maybe accidentally erasing the wrong one, whatever, which was nice. In the grade, no surprise, the images were impeccable. We shot both cameras at 4K DCI in XFAVC, which is 10-bit 422, and we had plenty of information to work with. The exposures were great. Again, we were in the desert. Shooting C-Log2 cinema gamut. And like I said, as we were shooting outside, the sun provided us plenty of exposure. So underexposure was not a concern. We got a nice dense negative out of the image. And honestly, the comment I got most universally was, oh, wow, that looks like film, or that looks like a movie. I mean, it highlights a lot of things, but I think one of the main things is just getting a good exposure, like using a lot of light. Cameras are so sensitive now and LEDs are so underpowered that we've kind of hit this weird middle ground where everything's kind of soft and flat, even if you do have a lot of contrast in the image, but use a lot of light, looks more cinematic. But everything I was showing everyone was with just the basic Resolve 2383 LUT after, obviously, your Cineon 709 conversion. And it looked great. Little contrast adjustment, we're good to go. That's not what I used in the final edit, but absolutely could have. The client was happy with that. You know, it's like chefs, you know, they're like, if you have great ingredients, you only need to season it. You don't got to put barbecue sauce on it or anything. Another nice thing about the C500 C70 combo is both cameras can shoot 12-bit RAW, but I knew I wasn't going to need to lean on that for this particular shoot, especially knowing that I was going to hand off the footage to the client after for them to use for, you know, whatever they needed, social post, something like that. So I didn't want to saddle them with the file format that they had never seen before. You know, At the most, they're photographers, not a lot of video people on that team, at the moment at least. So XFABC, widely adopted, and every NLE can use it. And even on my modest PC, it never chugs. My computer has a i7 7700K and a GTX 1070. I do have 64 gigs of RAM though, but it's, pretty middle of the road by today's standards. Another thing that was great is both cameras have timecode ports. So we ran the Deity TC1 boxes on them. So when I got into the edit, I could just auto-populate the timeline with all the clips and they were already synced up, allowing me to edit the more narrative portions of the fashion video even quicker. And it was easier for me to remember when stuff happened and I could see when we took breaks and stuff. Timecode is invaluable. If you don't have timecode, you're missing out unless you only have one camera. That doesn't matter. But, for interviews, the interview thing I did, a little easier to just clap sync because it's just one running clip. But even for that, timecode is a value add, in any multi-camera scenario. I will never be without it. And I have a review of those TC1s coming either shortly or depending on when you watch this, it's already out. As a side note, Adam, my cameraman, wasn't as familiar with the current generation of Canon C-Series cameras as I was. And so for the first day, he actually exposed to the right because that's how he tends to shoot with his personal camera. And having done plenty of tests over the years with these newer cameras, the new C-Series, I know that you should actually just put skin around 50 to 60 IRE. You can actually expose the new Canon C-Series cameras at key, if you will, as opposed to back in the day, the older ones, you kind of wanted to give it a little more boost. These ones, shadows are clean enough, just shoot normally. One thing that people seem to get confused about when it comes to full frame over Super 35 is the imaging characteristics. No, full frame does not give you a shallower depth of field. Lenses do. No, using a speed booster on a Super 35 camera does not make your camera full frame. I get what people are saying, but let's be clear with our terminology, What a larger sensor does give you is, and I've shown this in my C300 versus C500 tests online and in the article on Pro Video, is the ability to see the entire character of larger format lenses, like I said, slightly less noise because of the larger imaging plane and pixels are smaller, for a given size, and greater tonality, gradations between tones, exposure, colors. In other words, a transition from black to white on a gradient, or say the transition from the light side of a face to the dark side, takes place over more physical real estate on a full frame sensor, giving you a softer look, more apparent sharpness because the pixels are smaller, like I said, for a given space, and more visual data to work with. The appearance of less noise simply comes from cramming more information captured by the sensor in the same display size. That's a faster way to say it. Resolution is one thing, but physical resolution is the real winner. And even so, and while I do prefer larger sensors when possible for those technical reasons, these things are oftentimes more academic than anything. The Super 35 sensor on the C70 is absolutely no slouch, as I mentioned, and it cut in beautifully with the C500. Having those sumirays was really where the images got their lift and looked and their character. It'd be a whole different ball game if we used like kit lenses or something, These days, the internet discourse seems to be obsessed with the camera's relevance in, 2000 whatever. Is it relevant this year? Like next year? I'm telling you, like you can't say is it relevant this year and then simultaneously champion the idea of using older cameras for whatever aesthetic or financial reasons you have. So all cameras are always relevant. All right. Maybe if you physically can't get the footage off the camera, like some of the older Firewire only models of yesterday, like my XL2, then it's a discussion about relevance. But overall, every tool has a purpose to someone. And I actually did a video about my pulling video from the S video port and the ketchup and mayo cables out of my XL2. And I was able to record on an external recorder because I had a converter to HDMI. So you can still shoot on the XL2, which then I suppose does make it relevant. All that being said, I do understand the intent of those kinds of questions. When your client expects something around the standard of today's modern looks, you want to deliver on that. So that's, I think, what people are talking about when they're talking about relevancy. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that the newest, hottest features are necessary for such a deliverable, but I do agree that it is important to have all the tools necessary to deliver on the promise of a high quality end product. So while these cameras are in no way long in the tooth, do they hold up to today's newer releases? The C500, C70, are they still relevant today? Duh. Super duh. I've put the C500 up against the Sony Venice, still very much used, the Alexa, very much used, the LF rather, and the regular one, but in this case the LF, the FX9, and the V Raptor. And in each case, the C500 was visually just as good and in some cases preferable to those cameras depending on what you're looking for. You can read that test. I have a video online. Go look it up. Make a judgment call for yourself. That's my opinion, but I have empirical, let's not call it evidence, but empirical findings that you can look at. Like I said, the C70 is basically a C300 Mark III Mini. And comparing the C500 to the C300, as I've done, I can tell you they fare quite well against each other, and obviously those other cameras. So there's simply no denying the quality and flexibility of these cameras. I don't see a case in the next 5 to 10 years where something would come out that would just blow the image quality of the modern Canon C-series cameras out of the water. Will we get cameras with better dynamic range, highlight retention, or bit depth? Maybe, probably, but I don't know if it'll really matter. It's always nice, but as I've shown here, I wouldn't have needed it. So just having it doesn't, it's a fun thing to talk about, but it's not necessary. In a super high contrast environment like the desert in the middle of the day, I didn't lose any information of the shadows or the highlights. So goody. Are there downsides to these cameras? To a degree, there's downsides to anything. I love the body style of the C500 Mark II or the 300 Mark III. The C70's DSLR-ish kind of body isn't my favorite. It's all right, though. It works for certain situations. The LCD screen on it could use a little tweak. It doesn't fold flat against the side of the camera, for instance. So going vertical is you kind of have to, I wish it went down. It's a little plasticky feeling, sort of. But I'd have liked to seen an SDI out port on it as well. But those are pretty minor overall for the quality you're getting from that camera. I don't really see anything to complain about. I guess the C500 not having 120 frames at Super 35, instead you get 120 at Super 16. That's kind of but I honestly don't think anything over 60 frames is particularly necessary for the work I do. Certain commercial work, yeah, totally. Maybe scientific stuff, I suppose, but maybe you're just shooting a C70 or a C300 Mark III in those cases. The C500 is definitely a, let's call it narrative first camera. Whereas the C300 Mark III or even the C70 is more all arounder. But in any case, final verdict is the C70 and the C500, absolutely killer combo. Compared to other offerings from Canon and even cameras from other manufacturers, I think they're exactly the right tools for most jobs and have a lot of life left in them. Like I said, 5-10 years, I don't see any difference. If the C70 has a Mark II or like if there's a C90, so to speak, I don't know how we all understand where these numbers are coming from. We all intrinsically get like, it wouldn't be a C80. It's got to be 90. Anyway, I think all I'd really want to see is the aforementioned LCD tweak, an SDI port added, and potentially for it to be full frame. But then maybe you would just have a C500, that'd be interesting. That'd be a power move by Canon. But for the C500, no notes. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Go check out the video. I'm sure I love it. Clients are impressed. I'm sure you'll think it looks good. Couple interview things up online that you can find. But I hope that was informative, helpful, entertaining, or whatever floats your boat. Thank you for watching, and you'll see me later. I can't see you, like I said in a different video, looking at a lens.